The night they made me kneel was the night a billionaire noticed I existed. Rain tapped softly against the floor-to-ceiling windows of the Whitmore estate, turning the world outside into a blur of silver lights and shadows. Inside, everything sparkled. Crystal chandeliers hung above hundreds of guests dressed in designer gowns and tailored suits. Laughter drifted through the grand ballroom like music. I stood near the edge of it all in a black Maid uniform, holding a tray of empty champagne glasses and trying to be invisible. That was the first rule of my job. Be useful. Be silent. Never be noticed. At 24 years old, I had spent 3 years working at the Whitmore estate, cleaning rooms larger than my entire apartment and serving people who never bothered to learn my name. Most nights, that didn't bother me. Wealthy people lived in a different universe. I dusted their shelves and washed their dishes. Our worlds never touched. But that night was different. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from the center of the ballroom. Someone had spilled red wine across a section of imported white marble near the grand staircase. Before I could reach for a towel, Mrs. Whitmore's sharp voice cut through the room. "Clara." Every muscle in my body tightened. Conversation slowed. Heads turned. "Clean it immediately," she said. I nodded. "Yes, ma'am." I grabbed a cloth from a nearby service cart and hurried toward the stain. The marble reflected hundreds of tiny lights from the chandeliers above. As I crouched down, I could feel eyes on me. Not one pair. Dozens. Wealthy strangers watched me scrub the floor while continuing their conversations as if I were part of the furniture. My cheeks burned, but I kept working. Pride didn't pay rent. Then Mrs. Whitmore spoke again. "On your knees, Clara. You missed a spot." A few guests exchanged awkward glances. Others pretended not to hear. I slowly lowered myself farther and wiped the marble again. The room seemed quieter than before. For a moment, I wanted to disappear. Instead, I focused on the stain until it vanished completely. "There," I said softly. "It's clean." Mrs. Whitmore gave a small nod and walked away without another word. The conversations resumed. The music returned. The world moved on. But something felt different. Like the air itself had shifted. I stood and gathered my supplies. That was when I felt it. A gaze. Heavy. Unwavering. I looked up toward the second-floor balcony overlooking the ballroom. A man stood alone near the railing. Tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in a dark suit that probably cost more than my yearly salary. Ethan Whitmore. The billionaire heir whose face appeared on magazine covers and business networks across America. His expression revealed nothing. No smile. No sympathy. No judgment. Just quiet observation. For 3 long seconds, neither of us looked away. Then someone called his name. He turned and disappeared into the crowd above. I should have forgotten about it. I should have gone back to work and finished my shift. But as I picked up the cloth from the marble floor, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that my life had just changed. And I had no idea how much it would cost. The gala ended close to midnight, but the feeling of Ethan Whitmore's eyes on me followed me long after the last guest left. I pushed a cleaning cart down a silent hallway lined with oil paintings worth more than everything I owned combined. The estate felt different after parties. The music was gone. The laughter had faded. All that remained were empty glasses, scattered decorations, and the quiet reminder that people like me stayed behind to clean up everyone else's memories. I was collecting abandoned champagne flutes from a private sitting room when I heard voices coming from the library. Normally, I would have turned around immediately. Staff members were not supposed to linger near family meetings. But one sentence stopped me cold. "If those documents become public, the company will lose millions." The voice belonged to a man I recognized from the gala. One of the investors. I froze beside the partially open door. Another voice answered. "Then make sure nobody finds out." My stomach tightened. Something about the conversation felt wrong. Not illegal. Not dramatic. Just wrong. The kind of conversation people had when they assumed nobody ordinary was listening. I should have walked away. Instead, I moved toward the service hallway that connected to the backside of the library. Years of working in the estate had taught me every hidden corridor and storage room. As I passed a narrow doorway, movement caught my eye. A man in a dark suit stood alone inside Ethan's private office. He was not supposed to be there. I knew that because the family had spent all week preparing the room for important meetings. The man glanced over his shoulder before opening a leather portfolio on Ethan's desk. My pulse jumped. He quickly exchanged several papers and slid the originals into his jacket. Then he left through another door without noticing me. For a moment I stood completely still. Maybe there was a reasonable explanation. Maybe I was misunderstanding what I had seen. But deep down, I knew better. I waited 30 seconds before stepping into the office. The room smelled faintly of cedar wood and expensive cologne. Everything appeared normal except for the open portfolio. My hands trembled as I compared the documents inside. The page numbers did not match. Signatures were missing. Someone had replaced them. I swallowed hard. This was not my problem. I was a maid. Nobody expected me to understand corporate paperwork. Nobody would believe me if I spoke up anyway. Yet I could not stop thinking about it. After another minute, I gathered the original documents the man had dropped beside a wastebasket during the switch. Then I placed them back inside the portfolio exactly where they belonged. The sound of footsteps echoed from the hallway. I spun around. Ethan stood in the doorway. His dark suit jacket hung over one shoulder. His tie was gone. He looked tired, but his eyes were sharp. They moved from me to the documents on the desk. Then back to me. Neither of us spoke. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he stepped farther into the room. "Clara," he said quietly. "Tell me why you are standing in my office at 12:30 in the morning." My mouth went dry. Every reasonable answer disappeared from my head the moment Ethan Whitmore looked at me. The office suddenly felt smaller than it had 30 seconds earlier. The glow from a desk lamp stretched across the polished wood, casting long shadows over the documents between us. I tightened my grip on the cleaning cloth still hanging from my hand. "I can explain," I said quietly. One corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. "That would be a good start." My heart hammered against my ribs. I told him everything. The conversation I overheard near the library. The investor. The man entering the office. The documents being switched. Every detail I could remember. Ethan listened without interrupting. That was somehow worse than being questioned. Most powerful people rushed to dismiss employees before hearing them out. He simply stood there, watching me with complete attention. When I finally finished, silence settled over the room again. Rain tapped softly against the windows overlooking the estate grounds. Somewhere far away, a grandfather clock struck 1 in the morning. Ethan stepped toward the desk and opened the portfolio. His eyes scanned the pages. Then he compared them to the originals I had recovered. The change in his expression was almost invisible. Almost. But I saw it. Something sharp flashed behind his calm exterior. He looked back at me. "You noticed all this?" I shrugged nervously. The page numbers did not match. Most executives would not have noticed that. I let out a small laugh. Then maybe they should hire more maids. For a second, the tension cracked. Ethan actually smiled. The sight caught me off guard. It transformed his entire face. Magazine photographs never showed that version of him. The real one looked younger. Human. The smile disappeared as quickly as it arrived. "You may have prevented a serious problem tonight, Clara." I shifted uncomfortably. I was just trying to do the right thing. His gaze remained fixed on me. "Do you always do that?" Usually. Even when nobody is watching? The question felt strange. Personal. I looked down at the floor. Especially then. Something unreadable passed through his eyes. He closed the portfolio and exhaled slowly. Most people in my world have a price. I did not know how to answer that. Maybe because I had spent years cleaning up after people whose wealth insulated them from consequences. Maybe because I had watched guests throw away food that would have covered my grocery budget for a month. Whatever the reason, the words left my mouth before I could stop them. Maybe the problem is that you keep looking in the wrong places. The room became very quiet. I immediately regretted saying it. He was my employer. A billionaire. I was a maid standing in his office after midnight. My career could end with a single sentence. Instead, Ethan stared at me for several long seconds. Then he nodded once. Slowly. Thoughtfully. As if I had just told him something nobody else ever dared to say. A knock sounded at the office door. A senior household manager stepped inside and froze when she saw us. Her eyes moved from Ethan to me and back again. The expression on her face lasted less than a second, but it was enough. Surprise. Suspicion. Judgment. Ethan noticed it too. And for the first time, I had the uncomfortable feeling that what happened tonight was not going to stay private for very long. The next morning, the estate felt colder. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of cold that settles into a room after people start talking about you when they think you cannot hear. I noticed it the moment I walked into the staff kitchen at 6:30. Conversation stopped. Coffee cups paused halfway to lips. A few people looked away too quickly. Others did not bother hiding their curiosity. I pretended not to notice and focused on preparing the breakfast service. By 8 o'clock, I understood exactly what had happened. Someone had seen me in Ethan's office. That single fact had already transformed into half a dozen different stories. According to one version, I had been caught snooping through confidential files. According to another, Ethan had personally invited me there. Neither story was true. Truth rarely survived long inside a house full of secrets. Interesting night, a maid named Jessica asked while arranging fresh flowers in the dining room. Her tone sounded casual. Her eyes did not. I forced a small smile. Not really. She nodded as though she knew I was lying. By lunchtime, the whispers had spread beyond the staff. Guests staying in the estate began studying me when they thought I was not looking. One woman actually handed me her empty teacup without breaking eye contact, as if she were evaluating something. I spent the afternoon cleaning guest suites and trying to ignore the growing knot in my stomach. Around 4 o'clock, I was polishing silver trays in one of the service kitchens when a familiar voice spoke behind me. You missed a fingerprint. I nearly dropped the tray. Ethan stood in the doorway. My pulse immediately sped up. Then I suppose I should polish it again. His eyes lowered to the tray. Or I could pretend not to notice. That would be very generous of you. A faint smile appeared. People tell me generosity is not my strongest trait. I looked back at the silver. People say a lot of things. The silence that followed felt strangely comfortable. Dangerous, too. Because comfort was not supposed to exist between people like us. Finally, Ethan stepped farther into the room. The documents were important. I nodded. I figured that out. You helped me avoid a serious problem. I was doing my job. No. His voice softened. You were doing more than that. Before I could answer, another voice interrupted us. Ethan. We both turned. A tall blonde woman stood near the doorway. Elegant. Perfectly dressed. The kind of woman magazine covers were designed for. Her diamond bracelet caught the afternoon light. Her smile did not reach her eyes. There you are, she said. Then she noticed me. Her gaze swept over my uniform. The polishing cloth in my hand. The tray. Every detail. Am I interrupting something? She asked. The question sounded polite. The meaning underneath it was not. Ethan's expression became unreadable. Clara was helping with estate business. The woman raised one eyebrow. A maid? The single word landed harder than it should have. Ethan did not respond immediately. Neither did I. The woman offered a graceful smile that somehow felt colder than ice. Then she extended her hand toward him. Your mother is waiting. We should not keep the board members waiting either. As they walked away together, I finally remembered her name. Victoria Sinclair. Future heiress. Family friend. The woman every financial newspaper expected Ethan Whitmore to marry. And judging by the look she gave me before leaving, she had already decided I was a problem. The next week should have been ordinary. Instead, it felt like I was walking through a house full of mirrors, constantly aware that someone might be watching. Victoria Sinclair's arrival changed everything. She began appearing everywhere. Breakfast meetings. Charity planning sessions. Evening dinners with investors. Every room seemed to bend around her presence. She belonged in the Whitmore world the way expensive art belonged on the walls. Elegant. Confident. Untouchable. I told myself none of that mattered. My life existed downstairs, not in the grand halls above. Yet somehow Ethan kept crossing into my world. 3 days after our conversation in the service kitchen, I found a maintenance worker struggling with a broken storage shelf in the basement. Boxes were stacked across the floor. Cleaning supplies rolled everywhere. I was helping reorganize everything when another pair of hands lifted one side of the shelf. I looked up and nearly dropped my clipboard. Ethan stood beside me wearing a dark sweater instead of a business suit. You know there are people whose entire job is fixing things, I said. He adjusted the shelf into place. I know. Then why are you here? Maybe I needed a break from people who only talk about quarterly earnings. I laughed before I could stop myself. His smile appeared immediately, as though he had been waiting for it. The moment lasted only seconds before footsteps echoed from the hallway. 2 employees entered carrying inventory forms. The instant they saw Ethan helping me, both froze. Their expressions mirrored the same confusion I had seen spreading throughout the estate. Ethan noticed but seemed completely unconcerned. He thanked them for the paperwork and walked away. The rumors doubled after that. By Friday, I could practically feel them moving through the halls. Staff members lowered their voices when I entered rooms. Some looked curious. Others looked annoyed. 1 or 2 looked openly hostile. Then came the real problem. I arrived for my shift Saturday morning and discovered that someone had assigned me to clean the East Guest Wing alone. The assignment made no sense. The wing contained 12 luxury suites and normally required 3 employees. By noon, I was exhausted. By 2 o'clock, my shoulders ached. By 4, I still had 2 rooms left. As I pushed a cart down the hallway, I noticed voices coming from one of the open suites. Victoria stood inside speaking with Mrs. Whitmore. Neither woman realized I was nearby. She's becoming a distraction, Victoria said. People are talking. Mrs. Whitmore sighed. I am aware. Then perhaps the situation should be handled before it becomes embarrassing. My stomach tightened. I quietly continued walking before they noticed me. That night, long after my shift ended, I sat alone at a bus stop 2 miles from the estate. The autumn air felt colder than usual. Streetlights reflected on wet pavement. I stared at the passing traffic and wondered how my life had become so complicated. A luxury sedan slowed beside the curb. The passenger window lowered. Ethan sat inside. What are you doing here? I asked. He glanced at the empty bus stop shelter. I could ask you the same question. Waiting for the bus. At 10:30 at night? That is generally how buses work. For a moment, he simply looked at me. Then he said something that made my heart stop. "Clara, is someone making your job harder because of me?" For a moment, I could not answer. Cars passed through the intersection behind us, their headlights streaking across the wet streets. Ethan's question hung in the cold night air between us. I looked away first. "You do not have to worry about it." His expression tightened slightly. "That is not an answer." I laughed quietly, but there was no humor in it. "You are a billionaire. I clean guest rooms. We both know how this story works." He rested one arm against the open window. "Explain it to me anyway." I stared at him. Most wealthy people never asked questions unless they already liked the answers. Ethan kept asking. That was part of the problem. "People see you talking to me," I said. "Then they start making assumptions. After that, they start choosing sides." His jaw shifted. "And someone assigned you an entire guest wing by yourself." I did not respond. The silence told him enough. Rain began falling again. Soft at first. Then steadier. Tiny drops tapped against the bus stop roof. Ethan looked out through the windshield for several seconds. When he finally spoke, his voice was calm. Too calm. "Get in." I blinked. "What?" "I will drive you home." "Absolutely not." A surprised laugh escaped him. "Why not?" "Because I enjoy having a job." "Clara." "Ethan." The use of his first name slipped out before I could stop it. For a second, neither of us moved. Something changed in his eyes. Something warmer. More personal. Dangerous. I looked away immediately. "You cannot keep rescuing me from buses." His smile grew. "I was not aware I had rescued you from any buses yet." Before I could answer, another car pulled up behind his. A black luxury sedan. The driver's door opened. Victoria stepped out holding an umbrella. My stomach dropped. Ethan noticed her at the same moment I did. She walked toward the passenger side with perfect confidence. The kind that came from spending a lifetime knowing every room belonged to you. Her eyes found me standing beneath the bus stop shelter. The smile she offered was flawless. It was also completely empty. "There you are," she said to Ethan. "Your mother has been trying to reach you." Ethan's expression cooled immediately. I turned my phone off. Victoria glanced at me. Just a glance. Yet somehow I felt examined from head to toe. "I see." Nobody spoke for several seconds. Rain filled the silence. Finally, I stepped backward. "My bus is coming." It was a lie. No bus was in sight. Ethan knew it. Victoria knew it. Still, neither of them challenged me. "Good night," I said. Ethan looked like he wanted to say something else. Instead he nodded. "Good night, Clara." I watched the cars disappear into the rain before releasing the breath I had been holding. The next morning, everything exploded. I arrived at the estate at 7 sharp. The moment I entered the staff entrance, Jessica rushed toward me with wide eyes. "Where have you been?" she whispered. My stomach tightened. "At home." "Then you have not heard?" A folded newspaper landed in my hands. The front page showed a photograph taken the previous night. Ethan's sedan. The bus stop. Me standing beside the open window. The headline underneath was impossible to ignore. Whitmore Air spotted with mystery woman amid engagement rumors. And for the first time, my private life had become public. By 9 o'clock that morning, every person in the estate had seen the photograph. Some pretended not to stare. Others did not bother pretending at all. I kept my eyes on my work and tried to ignore the whispers following me through the halls. It did not help. The article itself was ridiculous. It called me a mystery woman as if I were some glamorous socialite hiding a secret identity. The reality was much less exciting. I was carrying a cleaning supply inventory sheet and wearing shoes that were nearly 2 years old. Yet somehow, one blurry photograph had transformed me into gossip. Around noon, I was replacing fresh towels in a guest suite when a supervisor appeared at the door. "Mrs. Whitmore wants to see you." My stomach immediately tightened. The walk to her private sitting room felt longer than usual. Sunlight streamed through tall windows overlooking the estate gardens. Mrs. Whitmore sat at a polished table with Victoria beside her. Neither woman smiled when I entered. "You wanted to see me?" I asked. Mrs. Whitmore folded her hands. "Please sit." I remained standing. "I am fine here." Something flickered in Victoria's eyes. Amusement, perhaps. Mrs. Whitmore studied me for a moment before speaking. "You seem to have attracted an unusual amount of attention recently." There it was. I had been expecting it all morning. The newspaper story was not my idea. Nevertheless, Victoria said smoothly, "People are talking." I looked directly at her. People were already talking. The room became very quiet. Mrs. Whitmore leaned back slightly. "You are an intelligent young woman, Clara. That is why I am going to be honest with you." My pulse quickened. "Honest about what?" "About reality." Her voice remained calm. "My son lives in a world built on public perception. Investors, partnerships, board members, media relationships. Every decision affects thousands of people." I understood exactly where this conversation was heading. "And I do not belong in that world." Victoria and Mrs. Whitmore exchanged a glance. Neither denied it. The silence answered for them. Before anyone could say another word, the door opened. Ethan walked in. His gaze moved from his mother to Victoria and finally to me. He instantly understood something was wrong. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. Nobody answered immediately. Mrs. Whitmore finally sighed. "We were having a private conversation." Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Without me?" Victoria stood gracefully. "It was not necessary." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Ethan looked at me. "Clara?" I hesitated. Every instinct told me to leave. Instead, I told the truth. They were explaining reality. His expression hardened in a way I had never seen before. Not angry. Disappointed. "I see." Mrs. Whitmore stood. "Ethan, do not make this more complicated than it needs to be." He turned toward her. "Complicated for whom?" Nobody spoke. The silence stretched. Finally, Ethan looked back at me. "You should return to work." I nodded. The moment I reached the hallway, I exhaled shakily. My hands were trembling. Through the closed door, I could not hear every word that followed. But I heard enough. For the first time since this entire situation began, Ethan Whitmore was arguing with his own family because of me. The argument behind the closed door became the center of every conversation in the estate for the next 2 days. Nobody knew exactly what had been said. That did not stop people from inventing details. Rumors moved faster than facts. By Monday morning, some employees claimed Ethan had refused a business arrangement. Others insisted he had threatened to leave the company entirely. The only thing everyone agreed on was that the disagreement had something to do with me. I hated that. I hated being discussed by people who knew nothing about me. I hated walking into rooms and feeling conversations stop. Most of all, I hated the growing realization that Ethan was paying a price for simply treating me like a human being. Late that afternoon, I was arranging fresh flowers in one of the smaller reception rooms when Ethan appeared unexpectedly. He looked exhausted. Not physically. Emotionally. The kind of exhaustion that no amount of sleep could fix. "You look like you have not smiled all day," he said. I adjusted a white rose in the arrangement. "Maybe because everyone in this house has lost their minds." A quiet laugh escaped him. "That is a fair observation." For a moment, neither of us spoke. Sunlight filtered through the windows, casting gold across the polished floor. Outside, leaves drifted through the estate gardens as autumn slowly claimed the landscape. It should have been peaceful. Instead, tension seemed to follow us everywhere. Ethan stepped closer to the flower arrangement. My mother should not have spoken to you that way. I focused on the roses. She was not entirely wrong. About what? I hesitated. About reality. His expression changed immediately. Clara. Look around. I finally met his eyes. You own half the city. I clean guest rooms. Your family is worried about headlines. Mine worries about grocery bills. We are not living the same life. Something flickered across his face. Not anger. Frustration. Do you know what bothers me most? He asked quietly. What? You are the only person who speaks to me honestly. The words landed harder than they should have. I looked away first. The room suddenly felt too small. Before either of us could continue, footsteps echoed from the hallway. A young assistant hurried into the room carrying a tablet. Mr. Whitmore, you need to see this. Ethan accepted the device. His expression darkened as he read the screen. My stomach tightened immediately. What happened? For several seconds he said nothing. Then he handed me the tablet. An entertainment website filled the display. There was another photograph. This time it showed us standing together near the flowers. Someone had taken the picture through the reception room window only minutes earlier. The headline underneath was worse than the first one. Billionaire heir's obsession with estate Maid sparks new questions. My hands went cold. Hundreds of comments already filled the page. Strangers who had never met me were discussing my motives, my appearance, my character. Some called me ambitious. Others called me manipulative. None of them knew my name. Ethan took the tablet back and stared at the article. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he spoke 4 words that changed everything. This ends right now. I stared at him, waiting for an explanation. Ethan rarely spoke without thinking 3 steps ahead. That was one of the reasons he had built a reputation for always being in control. Yet something in his voice told me control was becoming difficult. He handed the tablet back to his assistant. Contact legal, he said calmly. I want every unauthorized photograph traced. The assistant nodded and hurried away. When we were alone again, I folded my arms. That is not going to solve the real problem. Ethan looked at me. And what is the real problem? I laughed softly. The entire country seems convinced I am secretly plotting to conquer the Whitmore family. His expression remained serious. Does that bother you? The question caught me off guard. Of course it bothered me. Total strangers were turning my life into entertainment. But somehow that was not what hurt most. No, I admitted quietly. What bothers me is that people are attacking you because of me. For the first time, Ethan looked genuinely surprised. Then he shook his head. Clara, nobody is attacking me because of you. Really? I gestured toward the tablet. Your family disagrees. His jaw tightened. My family disagrees with many things. Before I could respond, his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and immediately looked annoyed. Board meeting, he said. Now. I could tell from his expression that he wanted to refuse. Instead, he slipped the phone into his pocket. I have to go. I nodded. Good luck. He studied me for a second. That sounded sincere. Do not get used to it. A small smile appeared before he walked away. The smile disappeared from my face the moment he was gone. Because deep down, I knew the situation was becoming impossible. The following morning proved it. I arrived at work and found a sealed envelope waiting inside my employee locker. My name was printed neatly across the front. Inside was a single sheet of paper. A meeting request. Private. Confidential. Noon. The signature at the bottom belonged to Victoria Sinclair. My stomach dropped. Every instinct told me not to go. Unfortunately, curiosity won. At exactly noon, I entered one of the estate's smaller conference rooms. Victoria was already there. Sunlight streamed through the windows behind her. A leather folder rested on the polished table. She smiled politely. "Thank you for coming." I remained standing. "What is this about?" Victoria opened the folder and slid several documents toward me. I glanced down. The first page contained a number so large I thought I had misread it. Then I looked again. My pulse immediately accelerated. "What is this?" I asked. "An opportunity." Her voice remained calm. "A fresh start. A new apartment. Tuition assistance if you decide to continue your education. Financial security." I slowly raised my eyes to meet hers. "And what exactly would I have to do?" Victoria folded her hands. The silence lasted only a second. "Leave the estate." The room seemed to tilt. Outside the windows, autumn leaves drifted across the gardens. Inside, everything became perfectly still. "You are offering me money to disappear," I said quietly. "I am offering you freedom from an unpleasant situation." I stared at the documents. Then at her. And for the first time since this entire story began, I felt something stronger than embarrassment, stronger than fear. I felt insulted. Victoria's expression never changed. That was what made the moment so strange. She was offering enough money to transform my entire future, yet she looked as calm as someone discussing the weather. I lowered the papers back onto the table. "You think this is about money?" I asked quietly. "I think money solves many problems," she replied. "Not all of them." For the first time, something flickered behind her perfect composure. Not anger. Irritation. "Clara, let us not pretend this situation is helping anyone." I looked at the documents again. An apartment. Tuition. Financial security. Everything I had spent years working toward. Everything I had dreamed about during double shifts and late nights. It was enough to change a life. Maybe that was why her offer felt so insulting. Because she assumed everyone had a price. "You are mistaken about something," I said. "What is that?" I pushed the folder back across the table. "I never asked for any of this." The silence that followed felt heavier than the paperwork between us. Victoria stared at me for several seconds. Then she slowly closed the folder. "You are making a mistake." "Maybe." I stood. "But it will be my mistake." When I left the conference room, my legs felt unsteady. The conversation replayed in my head all afternoon. By evening, I could barely focus on work. Every polished surface reflected the same question. Had I just walked away from the opportunity of a lifetime? Around 7 o'clock, the answer arrived. Not from me. From Ethan. I was organizing inventory in a storage office when the door opened. One look at his face told me something was wrong. His tie was loosened. His expression was exhausted. Worse than before. "What happened?" I asked. He leaned against the doorframe and released a slow breath. "The board voted today." My stomach tightened immediately. "About what?" He laughed once. There was no humor in it. "About me." The room suddenly felt very quiet. Ethan walked farther inside and sat on a nearby chair. For the first time since I had known him, he looked less like a billionaire and more like an ordinary man carrying too much weight. "They think I have become a liability," he said. "Because of the articles?" He nodded. "Because of the articles. Because of investors. Because public perception affects stock prices. Because people are afraid of uncertainty." I stared at him. "What does that mean?" Ethan looked down at the floor for a moment before answering. It means I am no longer running the company. The words hit me harder than I expected. For years, Ethan Whitmore had been the face of one of the largest corporations in the country. Now, in a single meeting, everything had changed. I am sorry, I said quietly. He smiled faintly. You know what the strange part is? What? His eyes lifted to meet mine. This is the first honest conversation I have had all day. My chest tightened. Outside the small office, the estate continued moving as if nothing had happened. Staff members worked. Guests attended dinners. Cars arrived and departed through the front gates. Yet inside that room, something fundamental had shifted. For the first time, Ethan understood what it felt like to have the world decide who you were without asking your opinion. And for the first time, I realized just how much he had lost. That night, I could not sleep. Rain tapped softly against my apartment window while the city lights blurred beyond the glass. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan sitting in that storage office. Not the billionaire from magazine covers. Not the confident executive everyone admired. Just a man who had spent his entire life carrying expectations that no longer seemed to fit. By sunrise, I had made a decision. The next morning, I arrived at the estate earlier than usual. The halls were nearly empty. Staff members moved quietly through the kitchens preparing breakfast service. I headed toward the records room in the administrative wing. Most employees never entered it. Years of invoices, maintenance reports, contracts, and archived correspondence filled floor-to-ceiling cabinets. Normally, it was the most boring room in the entire estate. That morning, it became something else. I was searching for inventory records connected to the guest wing assignments when I noticed a familiar name. The same investor involved in the document switch months earlier. My pulse quickened. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Then I found another file. And another. The dates lined up with several decisions that had quietly benefited certain board members. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. I spent the next hour reviewing documents I probably should not have been reviewing. The deeper I looked, the more uncomfortable I became. Then I found it. A printed email chain attached to a financial report. Halfway down the page sat a sentence that made my stomach drop. Discussions regarding leadership transition should continue regardless of public controversy. The message had been sent weeks before the first photograph of Ethan and me ever appeared online. I stared at the page. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. The board had not reacted to the scandal. They had been planning something long before it existed. The scandal had simply given them an excuse. Footsteps sounded in the hallway. I quickly returned the file and stepped away from the cabinet. For the rest of the day, I could think about nothing else. By evening, I finally found Ethan in one of the estate libraries. He stood alone near a fireplace, reading through company reports. The sight made my chest tighten. Even after everything, he was still trying to fix problems that no longer belonged to him. Ethan. He looked up. Surprise crossed his face. You are still here? I found something. His expression changed immediately. I handed him a folded copy of the email I had printed. He read it once. Then again. The room became completely silent. Finally, he lowered the page. Where did you get this? Records room. He stared at the document. These dates are from before any media coverage. I nodded. Exactly. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan slowly sat down. Not because he was tired. Because the realization had hit him. The scandal had never been the real reason. Someone had already decided he needed to be removed. They had simply waited for the right opportunity. His eyes lifted toward mine. Clara. What? You may have just saved my company. The words settled between us. Outside, evening shadows stretched across the estate grounds. Inside, for the first time in weeks, I saw something return to Ethan's expression. Hope. 3 days later, I found myself standing outside the tallest office building I had ever entered. Glass towers rose into a gray autumn sky. Black cars lined the curb. Men and women in tailored suits moved through revolving doors carrying briefcases and coffee cups that probably cost more than my lunch. I looked down at my reflection in the glass. Simple navy dress. Plain shoes. No designer labels. No expensive jewelry. Just me. For a brief moment, I wondered if Victoria had been right. Maybe people like me did not belong in places like this. Then I remembered the email. I remembered the files. I remembered Ethan losing everything because powerful people assumed nobody would question them. And I walked inside. The board meeting occupied the entire top floor. Security personnel stood near every entrance. Assistants hurried through hallways carrying folders and tablets. The atmosphere felt tense. Like a storm waiting to arrive. Ethan met me near a private conference room. His expression was calmer than I expected. You came. I laughed softly. You sound surprised. After everything that happened, I was not sure you would. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he handed me a folder containing copies of the documents. Ready? I looked at the folder. Then at him. Not even a little. A faint smile appeared. Good. Honest answers seem to work for you. The boardroom itself looked exactly how I imagined power would look. A long polished table. Floor-to-ceiling windows. City skyline stretching for miles. Men and women whose decisions influenced thousands of lives. Several faces immediately turned toward me when I entered. Some looked confused. Others looked annoyed. One or two looked almost amused. Victoria sat near the far end of the table. Mrs. Whitmore beside her. Neither appeared happy to see me. The meeting began. Financial reports. Corporate updates. Formal speeches. For nearly an hour, I sat quietly while executives discussed numbers larger than anything I could truly comprehend. Then Ethan stood. The room immediately became silent. Before this meeting concludes, he said calmly, there is information the board needs to review. Several directors exchanged uneasy glances. Ethan placed copies of the emails and records on the table. One by one, people began reading. The mood changed almost instantly. Questions replaced confidence. Explanations replaced certainty. The carefully controlled narrative started falling apart. A director near the window removed his glasses and stared at the documents. Another asked for verification. A third demanded answers regarding the timeline. Through it all, Ethan remained calm. He did not raise his voice. He did not attack anyone. He simply presented the truth. The truth did the rest. Nearly 2 hours later, the meeting finally ended. Several board members who had supported his removal were suddenly defending themselves. Others quietly changed positions. By sunset, the vote that had removed Ethan was being formally reconsidered. As people began leaving the room, I stood near the windows overlooking the city. Orange light reflected across the glass towers below. Footsteps approached beside me. Ethan stopped at my side. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he looked out at the skyline and smiled. You know what is funny? He asked. What? His eyes remained on the horizon. The most important person in that room today was the only one who did not arrive in a limousine. And for the first time since all of this began, I realized the world around us was finally starting to change. The weeks that followed felt strangely quiet. Not because the world stopped talking. It did not. Newspapers continued printing stories. Business channels debated the board's decisions. Online commentators searched for new opinions every day. But for the first time, none of it seemed to control my life. The investigation confirmed what the documents had suggested. Several executives had been planning changes long before the scandal ever appeared. Once the truth became public, support for Ethan returned faster than anyone expected. By the beginning of winter, he was back where he belonged. Yet something about him had changed. The old Ethan measured success through stock prices, acquisitions, and headlines. The new Ethan paid attention to people. One afternoon, nearly 3 months after the board meeting, I was finishing my final shift at the estate. Snow drifted gently across the gardens outside. The Christmas lights wrapped around the trees reflected against the windows like scattered stars. My resignation letter sat folded inside my apron pocket. I had been accepted into a university program that would allow me to finish the education I had postponed years earlier. For the first time in my life, the future felt like something I could choose instead of something I had to survive. I walked into the library and found Ethan standing beside the fireplace. Some habits never changed. He looked up from a document and smiled. "I was wondering when you would tell me." I laughed softly. "How did you know?" He pointed toward my pocket. "You have checked that envelope at least 6 times since breakfast." I shook my head. "That is slightly unsettling. One of my many talents." I handed him the letter. He read it slowly before looking back at me. "You are leaving." "I am." "And you are happy about it?" "Very." For a moment, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled quietly. Snow tapped against the windows. Finally, Ethan folded the letter and handed it back. "Then I am happy too." The words surprised me. "You are not going to try to change my mind?" A smile touched his face. "Clara, the reason I admire you is because nobody changes your mind except you." My chest tightened unexpectedly. We stood there in comfortable silence for several seconds. Then Ethan stepped closer. Not dramatically. Not like something from a movie. Just enough that I could see the sincerity in his eyes. "There is something I should tell you." My heartbeat quickened. "What?" He glanced toward the falling snow outside before looking back at me. "When all of this started, everyone thought you were the person who complicated my life." I smiled. "I remember." He shook his head gently. "They were wrong." The room felt very still. "What do you mean?" His answer came quietly. "Honestly. The same way every important truth had arrived between us. You were the person who reminded me what mattered." I looked away for a second because suddenly the library seemed too bright. Too warm. Too full of emotion. When I finally met his eyes again, I understood something that had taken both of us an entire year to learn. Wealth could buy influence. Power could command attention. Status could shape public opinion. But none of those things could replace the rare gift of finding someone who saw you clearly. Outside, the snow continued falling across the estate. Inside, the future waited patiently for both of us. And for the first time, neither of us was afraid of it.